the Asian language is not written with the same characters as English, that oftentimes you will see 2 or 3 different spellings for the same word. And that's where, in a lot of ways, it's like we're trying to figure out what is the best spelling based on how the characters are pronounced. Because with English, as I'm sure you all are very aware, sometimes we have all of these diphthongs and different things that make the same sound. Like the letter K and the letter C make the same sound. You know, different combinations, you put in H. And so anyway, it gets kind of complicated. So you will notice some of these, if you look in your text, they may spell them slightly different than I do. I just tried to use the most commonly accepted ones, but however, even with that, it really depends on where you are and who you're reading. And so I don't overly stress out about those things, but I just kind of want to brace you for that in case it is something that really bothers you. So there you go. All right. So we want to talk about what is going to transition when the different dynasties in this era. And so the different dynasties. Now, to start this conversation, we want to spend a little time today. This is the era, or the area, excuse me, which we are going to be discussing, is going to be this Eastern Zhou dynasty, which is over here, actually Zhou, Eastern Zhou dynasty, which is kind of what's in yellow. All right, everything that is in this little darker gray area is the Western Zhou boundary. So those are going to be what we're talking about. We're going to spread Confucianism. Now, of course, why would I use this image for Confucianism? You guys must not eat Asian food as much as we do at our house. What do you commonly get with Asian food? This is true, but soy sauce.
Yes, Landon.
In what form, Landon? None of you get fortune cookies?
Yeah.
Sometimes in the fortune cookies it'll say Confucius says.
Oh, that's that one.
So Confucius was kind of known for having like these
seriously.
Yeah, like these proverbs and things in his writing. And so that's why the image of the spread of Confucianism, we are still spreading it through those little fortune cookies. Do all of you read your fortune cookies like no matter what? Yeah, Mike is like, what's mine say? It's like,
does he even understand what they mean?
Sometimes he does. He explained to me what antibodies were yesterday, so he probably understands more
What
than
was his explanation? Was it good?
Well, he talked about how they are triggered when B cells fight infection.
Go off, Micah.
He watches some really good shows. So yeah, I didn't realize. I knew that it was white blood cells, but I didn't know those were called B cells. So, or maybe I did at some point. It's just been a long time. But yeah, the science stuff, not my field. All right, but anyway. So the spread of Confucianism, much like me with B cells yesterday, was initiated by a leader named Confucius. Now it's kind of ironic because in English, when we talk about things that sound like this, we're talking about people being confused, right? But this is not what they're referencing. All right, so Confucius. Confucius was alive from 551 to 479 BC.
We jump around a lot, don't we?
From areas, different areas at different times. So we're back to Asia. And what we want to look at in this time period, it's a time period that begins what's called the warring states, like they're at war. And what they're warring about has to do with trying to establish their government. If you think about the areas we talk about, we kind of see similar themes, right? First, it's more about developing civilization. And then we see developing city-states. And then we see kind of development of religion, almost state-ran religion, our philosophies. And so you see these constant themes evolving. Now, the last lecture we had related to China, we talked about that cycle. Do you remember the cycle? Where it was like an empire would rise up with new ideas to face a crisis, and then things would go well, the mandate of heaven. And then something would happen to cause it to collapse, and then we would realize they're corrupt, and so you had that 7-point cycle that would happen over and over and over again. So what happens here? He is a member of the Shihai class, which means he is a knight, basically. To put it into language that you could probably relate to, he is a knight. Now, as a knight, suicidal state. As a knight, he is kind of the lowest among the aristocrats. The service was a way that you could move up in society, but there are other more, at the time, considered to be noble ways.
There was people higher than mine.
Yes. Like you would have, like the people in government and things like that. So he is the lowest, he's in the lowest class among the aristocrats. And his family name was Kung. And he was also known as Kung Fu Tu, or
two separate words.
3 separate words. Yes.
Okay.
Kung Fu Tu, or Master Kung. And of course, I'm sure this brings you all to Kung Fu, which people who practice Kung Fu, if they practice it in its purity, also are followers of Confucianism. So oftentimes with different, I can't hold on to anything today, with different Eastern-based martial arts, you often see connections to the philosophies of the Middle East as well. All right. So Confucius is his Latinized name. His Latin name. Like when he was alive, if you would have said, "Hey, yo, Confucius," he would have never turned around. Because he actually wasn't given that name until Jesuit missionaries came to the area in the 17th century. And they actually named him Confucius. I'm guessing making fun of him, really. Because they were saying he was confused. So it's interesting that we still use that because in a lot of ways it's really kind of insulting, But it's interesting when you find out the origin of some things sometimes. So some beliefs of Confucianism. Confucianism taught that human nature is innately good. That means that we are naturally good. Human nature is innately good. However, moral education made some people superior. Moral education made some people superior. So to give you a specific kind of translated quote here, by nature, men are pretty much alike. It is by learning and practice that set them apart. So we are all born good, according to Confucius. Everybody, like before you were born, or when you were born, you were good. We're all born good. However, it is our practice and our education that actually sets us in a different direction or path. All right. He also says that in education, there are no class distinctions. That education takes the place of class, if you will. He taught the people that they must return to virtue and live the nature of Zen. Now, this is often translated and referred to as Zen. You ever heard people talk about being Zen? What does it mean to be Zen? Yeah. It's like finding your happy place. That's kind of the idea here. So he's talking about returning to like being centered is another term we use sometimes, to finding your purpose, coming back to things. And so what does this mean? It means humanity. It means benevolence, and it means love. And so he says we must actually practice Zhen in conjunction with Li, L-I. Zhen Li. And Li here means moral and social propriety. So we must be both morally and socially connected to these things of humanity, benevolence, brotherly love. Easy enough. So through Zen and Li, you should be able to reach the state of Tao. This is our goal, is to reach the state of Tao. Now, what is Tao? Tao is the moral way that life is ordained by heaven. Tao is how life should be. And this was ordained by past rulers, and it was also put in place by kind of mythology in the early Zhou dynasty. That our goal is to basically return to Tao. Now, with this, Tao believed that, or Taoism taught that all individuals exist within society. We all exist within society. But moral worth, not birth. Nice little rhyme there. Moral worth, not birth, makes the man. And I think this is a very modern concept in an unmodern society, actually, because, I think that's a lot of what we believe now. And it's kind of a nature versus nurture thing. Sometimes we can see where this is true and where it's not. But, you should not, we believe as a society that we say we believe, let me put it like that you should not be judged, so to speak, for the sins of your father. We believe that you should be able to stand as your own person, that it shouldn't be based on your pedigree. However, as we know, that's not always the case, is it? Sometimes we are, so to speak, judged for the sins of our fathers. Or we are benefited because of the goodness of our ancestry. And so these are things that are very true. All right? And so, leaders should be virtuous, and leaders should rule by example instead of fear. Leaders should be virtuous and should rule by example instead of fear. And so he teaches that there are 5 basic relationships. 5 basic relationships. Number 1. The first basic relationship is the ruler and the minister. The relationship between the ruler and the minister. So, religion and state here. Second basic relationship is that between father and son. Father and son. Father and son. Your third basic relationship is husband and wife. Your fourth, the elder and the younger. And your last is between friend and friend. Between friend and friend. All right. So he believes that relationships are reciprocal. What does the word reciprocal mean?
They go both ways.
Yes. That means, I do for you, you do for me, essentially. And so he says with this, that each person has obligations in these relationships to each other.
This is Confucius saying all this.
This is what Confucius says. Now, these are the teachings of Confucianism. And as we know, he's called Kung Fu Zhou. And so let's move from Confucius and Confucianism to a different individual. And this is Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu and what he is going to call Taoism. So Confucius had Confucianism, and this is Taoism. Just to show you real quickly. All right, so this is a statue that is supposed to represent Confucius. It was built many years after he was dead, so how accurate it is, I don't know, but Taoism is the idea of kind of like balance in the universe, if you will. So that is where we're going to pick up with Lao Tzu. This is a statue built to resemble Lao Tzu. I almost think that maybe they didn't like him very much. It's not the most flattering of statues. Not even completely sure what, like his ears and things are kind of crazy, but I don't know. So here's what Lao Tzu teaches. He teaches that there is no proof. Well, first of all, let me stop here. He doesn't teach this. There's actually no proof that Lao Tzu ever existed. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm saying there's no proof. Where we do know there was a Confucius. Many followers insisted that he was a senior contemporary to Confucianism, to Confucian, that was during the same era as he. However, this is all taught many years after these men would have been dead. So if that is the case, Confucius would have been dead for many years at this point, as would Lao Tzu. But here's what what is believed about Lao Tzu. The term Taoism means the way. This is the opposite. Their beliefs were the opposite of Confucius. Basically, the most important thing that you have to understand to understand Taoism is kind of how they believed about ruling your people, kind of their fundamental beliefs for ruling their people. They believed a sage rules his people by emptying their minds. They believe that this person who rules is going to fill your bellies. So when somebody is in control of your government and they teach you not to think, but they give you things that you like, they filled your bellies, right? And when people aren't hungry, both figuratively and literally, do they work as hard? Well, if you knew that you had to get out and work today, and if you didn't, there would be no food on your table, would you be a little more motivated? Possibly. That is the argument of Taoism, is that when your ruler empties your mind and fills your bellies, your ambition is weakened. You don't feel as much of a necessity, if you will, to acquire things, to work hard. And you may feel differently. It's just this is what they teach. He strives, this sage, this ruler, if you will, according to the belief of Taoism, strives to keep the people innocent of knowledge. Why would you not want the people to have knowledge? Absolutely. People who do not have knowledge are more easily controlled. As humans, and this may sound like a strange statement, but I think you will follow me on this. As humans, we tend to trust people until we don't, oftentimes. And then humans who have gotten to the point where they tend to have no trust, it's because they've been burned, right? You ever notice like children are extremely trusting? You're extremely trusting until you're not. Until something that has happened that has violated your trust to where you start to say, I don't trust you, or I don't trust people. And so this is what he's saying is that they try to keep the people innocent of knowledge, and therefore they won't question. They won't question the system. They won't question what's going on, and they are easily deceived. He says that by doing this, if anybody is caught meddling, they weed them out. Very Stalinistic, Hitleristic type philosophy. Get rid of the questioners. Because if you see the questioners start to disappear, you don't question as much. By doing nothing that interferes with anything, I love this, nothing is left unregulated. So if people are afraid to do anything or just feel or just don't question, then the government is able to control them. It's kind of an interesting thought, but I definitely follow the logic there. All right. The sage ruler, he says, should do nothing at all. He says that the troubles of the world, the reason the world has trouble is because the government interferes too much. The government is doing too much. He declares that civilization is what has corrupted people. We are corrupt because of civilization. You think there's possibly some truth to that? I mean, I could see where the idea of, as people begin to have things, they begin to want things, and want leads to other issues. And so when we were a more simple world, I guess, where you went around and gathered and collected, and, then you didn't have as much of this, as he calls it, corruption, perhaps. I get the line of thinking anyway. He believed in natural virtues that were instinctive. However, he is not a big proponent of moral education. He believes in natural, instinctive virtues, not necessarily moral education. So you see the difference, where moral education was all what Confucius was about. He's like, no, we got to educate the people. We got to make sure they know about these things. And then come in, Lao Tzu's like, no, we don't need to do that. So you see two very different ideas here. Hello.
Do you have Emily Smith?
I do have Emily Smith, and I'm glad you said that because I need to get this to Emily Smith as well. Very good picture of you. All right. So, the last philosophy that we want to look at here, we're going to get through these three philosophies, and then that's kind of where I'm going to stop with you for the day, and you'll have an assignment on the three philosophies. But the last philosophy is legalism. Legalism. So what is legalism? Well, legalism is the last philosophy that emerges from this kind of period, if you will. The last one. Interestingly enough, it has the greatest impact on political life at that time. Has the greatest impact on political life at that current era. And so legalism is going to be, the idea is that legalistic leaders were often high government officials. So in other words, you want people in charge. You want people in charge who are high up in the government and that they are well-versed, if you will, in the law. So the first book about this was written by a gentleman, or a man by the name of Lord Shang. They want their leaders to be well versed in the law, to live by the law, basically. So the book is called The Lord Shang. It is about Shang Yang. It is about Shang Yang. It is the first book to promote these ideas of legalism. And if you want the specific year on the Lord Shang, the year is 338 BC. So he strongly emphasized the significance of rule by law, and he put people in place to let him know if you weren't doing what you were supposed to do. All right. So some things that he disagreed with. Some of the classic, if you will, virtues that he did not agree with. First, piety. What does it mean to say a person is pious? Do you know? A pious person. Piety means a deep commitment to religion. So he's like, there's no reason for you to be deeply committed to religion. That was not something that he put a strong value on. Second, I like this one. He didn't think that sincerity was all that important. No need to be sincere, right? And the last one he didn't particularly care for is humanity. Found that one kind of interesting. Human nature. He's like, that's overrated. He believed that these values that I have just listed to you, piety, sincerity, and humanity, tended to dissuade people from the things that were important. Well, then what's important would be the good question, right? Because importance is a value question, right? What's important to you might not be what's important to me. And so he said what makes things important, or what should be important to us, is the pursuit of agriculture and warfare. So we got to have enough to eat, and we got to go conquer people. That's what matters. He also wished to eliminate all classes of people. Now, when we eliminate class, what is that called? Yes, I mean, you're bordering socialism, communism here, depending on how you proceed with that. He didn't like aristocrats because they were born to privilege. He didn't like, I can get the aristocrat thing, but some of these others, it's kind of interesting to see his logic on. He didn't like artisans. So artisans are people who create things, right? So why wouldn't he like artisans? Does anybody have a guess here? Because I think it's kind of interesting.
Because they're the things that he disagrees with, like humanity and nature.
Oh, that's a really good thought, and I wish it was that deep, because that's really much better than the truth. So I like that. You're very good with that. Good job. Good job, Grandma. You need to teach him something. You need to let Lloyd get past your legalism. He doesn't like them because they produce luxury items for the aristocrats. Which he's like, yeah, I don't like you. You make stuff for them. You're bad. Third, he doesn't like innkeepers. Like people who keep inns, which an inn, I would assume you would be aware of this, but things change a lot. We don't really use the term inn anymore. Yes. So if you're a hotel manager, he's not a fan of you. Why?
You'd rather go sleep on the ground.
Yes, you have the aristocrats. He says that sometimes travelers are troublesome. So travelers cause problems. So yeah, we don't like you people that run hotels. I mean, it's what Shane Yang says. So yeah,
It's Shane Yang's world and we're just all living in it.
that's it. See? Yeah, these kind of cracked me up when I started studying. I was like, that's kind of funny. He's like, it makes me think of probably none of you have ever seen the original Silence of the Lambs, which is definitely an R-rated movie that I cannot recommend that you watch. However, some of the great quotes come from this, and it's when this